Welcome to Media Makers Spotlight from Women in Film and Video in Washington, D.C. We bring you conversations with industry professionals for behind the screens, insight and inspiration.
Welcome to Media Maker Spotlight. I'm your host, Sandra Abrams, and in this episode, I chat with the amazing Maxine Peake, who is the lead in a new geopolitical thriller, Words of War. In this film, she plays Russian-American journalist Anna Politkovskaya. She was a fearless voice against political corruption and human rights. She was covering the Chechen War when she was murdered near her apartment in Moscow on October 7th, 2006, the same day as Vladimir Putin's birthday. Now, a little bit about Maxine. She's a 3-time BAFTA-nominated actress with a long list of credits to her name with both stage and screen. And on this side of the pond, people may have recognized her from Shameless. She was stars of Veronica Fisher. She was on Silk as Martha Costello, which Silk is still running here in the United States. And more recently, she was Dolores Price in Say Nothing, a limited series on Hulu, which ran in November. Joining her in this cast of this geopolitical thriller is Ciaran Hinds from Belfast, and he's her editor, Dimtry. Jason Isaacs was Lucius Malfoy in the Harry Potter series, but more recently on White Lotus. He plays her husband, Sasha. Sean Penn is one of the executive producers, along with Congressman Eric Swalwell, a Democrat from California. There's many other amazing producers who brought this independent film forward. But I do want to mention my friend, Mark Maxey, and that's how we connected here. And Mark and I are both on the board for Women in Film and Video. And Women in Film and Video is the third largest women in film group in the United States after New York and LA. So we're very excited to have you speaking with us today for our podcast.
Yes, I'm very excited to be here. Brilliant. Thank you for having me on board.
Yeah, and congratulations on the film, but also congratulations on being the lead for this film. So thank you.
Yeah. No.
I wanted to ask you, how did this film come about for you, and why did you take the role? Because, I mean, Anna seems like she's a strong person. I've read a little bit about you. You seem like you have a strong, personality as well. So then I thought maybe that's it. But, let's hear from you as to why you took the role and what was it about Anna that drew you to this role?
Well, I think the sort of offer came through Miriam Segal, one of the producers. And I'd done a show in England called Anne, which was based on a true story about Anne Williams, who'd lost her son, Kevin Williams, at the Hillsborough football disaster, which actually the anniversary was just yesterday in the UK, where 97 attendees at a football match were killed in a crush, unlawfully killed. And Anne spent her life. There was a huge cover-up in the UK about it. The establishment did the big cover-up. She spent her life uncovering that and getting justice for her son, Kevin, who was only 14 when he died. And the rest of those who were unlawfully killed. And I played Anne in this series, and Miriam had seen it, and Miriam said, for whatever reason, my performance had inspired her to go, that's who I want to play Anna. So that's how it came. That's how the offer came through. I mean, I was surprised, probably as most people, that she'd thought of me to play the part. I mean, very honoured. And obviously, I knew a little bit about Anna, but not very much. I knew that she'd been murdered, but I knew not much else about her, to my shame, really. And then once I started to do some research, I just thought, well, this is a dream of a part. And such an important story that needs to be told. So, I sort of in the UK, I do tend to do pieces that, have either a social commentary or a sort of political leaning. Not always, I started off in comedy. But so sometimes I think I'm sort of the go-to if it's a slightly complex subject matter. But yeah, I just felt I didn't really have to think very much about saying yes.
In preparing to play Anna, what did you read or research? Was it her book? Was it something else that you said, okay, this is going to help me prepare? Because I think she had a book. It was called a Russian diary. And the subtitle was A Journalist's Final Account of Life, Corruption, and Death in Putin's Russia.
Yeah. I mean, that was the jumping off point was was that book. I mean, and there's many books that she's written and many books have been written about her. But so for me, and I think that book was so crucial for me to get into the mindset. I mean, what was slightly complicated, or not complicated, but I had to sort of find a way around, was that obviously I'm English. To me, there's something obviously very different from the English psyche to the Russian psyche. But my way in through Anna was her writing is, of course, it's this amazing expose, but she writes so beautifully as well. I mean, you could imagine, so we're going to read, this could be quite dry material, but there's a poetry. There's a beauty within the horror that she managed. I mean, I don't mean a beauty, but the way she articulates it's in such not that it seduces you, but you want to read more. And it's horrific, but that's her skill, that she can get an audience to go with her into some of the, readership into some terrible places that you could possibly turn off. So I think that was her real skill, was that connection. She had that human connection. She knew how to tell, I mean, they're not the factual, but tell these stories and keep an audience engaged. Because as we know, we do, if we don't like it, you know what I mean, we turn off, don't we? And finding news footage, reading about Putin, just getting into Russia at that time, Moscow at that time, speaking to people. I was really surprised how many people I sort of mentioned and went, I've met her, or I met her sister.
Wonderful.
Or yeah, it's really odd.
That was great that you got an opportunity to speak to people who knew her. I was wondering if, because her editor and that relationship, the journalist-editor relationship, is so important, and her editor is still alive. So I didn't know if you had spoken to him, but you did speak to people who knew her.
Yeah, I had a great friend, Baroness Helena Kennedy, who I first met when I was researching for Silk. And she's this extraordinary KC who has written many books about the sort of female experience. Eve Was Framed is one of her, if anybody's interested in the law, you've got to read Baroness Helena Kennedy's Eve Was Framed. And we keep in touch. And she said, what are you up to next? And I said, I'm about to play Anna Politkovskaya. And she said, I met her. And I spoke to her. And I was like, well, you need to tell me all about it. And she said it was very brief, but I mean, just from what she spoke, and I think Anna had relayed to Helena her fears about what she was up to and that struck me as well, because I think there's this.
Yeah, there was a number of times she had been given warnings, that she had been poisoned at one point. There was a number of people saying, what are you doing? And her husband was a reporter at one point. He was very concerned.
And I mean, she was poisoned. She got, when she was out in Chechnya, she was subjected to a mock execution. The description of it, and she just believed so vehemently in that the truth had to get out there, and that and for her it was all about the civilians. It was about the civilian experience in all this and how their story had to be told.
And she really was for human rights. That was really important to her. So it sounds like you had great material to work with, and then trying to work through that, and understanding you had people to speak to. Was there any particular challenge, or was there a challenging scene that you said, all right, this is going to be a very memorable scene that I really believe, audience should,
I think what I love about the film, of course, it's about her quest for the truth. It's about her sacrifice, but it's also, it's very domestic. It's about it's very much about the impact on the family when somebody chooses this road, and how the waves of that, the ripple effects on the family. And I think for me, it was about exploring that family dynamic, and the questions get thrown up. And I'm childless. I am, And for me, I was very much, when Ilya, her son, he says, this is selfish. I don't want you to do this. Why do you think of us? And, she retorts back, listen to yourself. And a few people I spoke to went, oh, it's very selfish what she does. And I was like, it's so not selfish. It's selfless, But again, I haven't that ultimate connection with the child. But for me, it was digging deep. And of course she loved her family, and of course that unit, but the just the drive to tell the truth, what is important. Right. And in my mind I was like, the family will cope, the family will manage, even if I'm not here, but these people need me. And and it was balancing that, where do you put your energies, and when they're being pushed and pulled many ways, and especially as a female in that situation. Right. Men are usually allowed to go off, aren't they? And do their
and
thing.
No one asked a woman about their sense of balance, type of thing. No.
Nobody says, how's your family feeling about it? How's how are they coping at home? He's off being a hero. Well, Anna had to be a hero and be a mother and be a wife and, be a homemaker. And, and then when Sasha, his career, and as the film is leaning towards the fact, because Anna became so prolific, his then career suffered. She was the main breadwinner.
Right.
So she had so much.
I had read that she was not the reporter initially, and that, so she grew into that role and then became this important voice, for people. Yeah. At that time, and that he was the reporter, but then he became not as in the forefront as she was. Yeah. So you were able to look at that dynamic there.
Yeah, I think, and because he was a star, you know what I mean? He had a show, he was on the television, and again, it's that dynamic in a relationship. What happens, especially when a female again comes, and her sort of, I hate the word stardom, and it wasn't that, I'm being crass, but came from actual, real, sort of, let's say, human rights work, making a huge difference, putting her life on the line. That's, I don't think it's always very easy to swallow for the partner.
Right, right. So you had some really good challenges, but also you had this arc of what is it? It wasn't just work, but there was this other dynamic going on there.
Yeah. And Jason Isaacs is brilliant. Well, and he's such a...
Tell us about working with Jason Isaacs there. What was that? What was that like? Because he plays the part, he's Alexander Sasha, but he's, the concern, he is a concern about her safety.
Yeah. No, absolutely brilliant. Ciaran Hinds and Jason Isaacs, the pair of them, to be in a film, to play a lead in a film with those two sort of, right, behemoths of the screen, and stay, and I've been admirers of both of them for so long. And then even you become bigger admirers when you get to work with them. And then when they are, and I know sometimes you think actors, we can sound a little bit, we'd say corny, but the fact that they delivered, Jason, he was there because he felt the story needed to be told. He's great friends with Miriam Segal, who's a producer. Oh, and Miriam's got an amazing sort of political pedigree. Miriam's father, Roland Segal, was big in the ANC in South Africa. He was really great friends with Joe Slovo, who in my household was Joe was a big deal, so there was this and Jason and Miriam had been, I think, friends from university. So Jason came on board, because he felt, it was a really important story, but he was so generous and he's such a passion for what he does. And we were allowed to, we just played. He was great. A lot of the time the script sort of went out the window. At first I was like, what's he doing? He was going, no, let's just improvise. And I was like,
wonderful. So there was some improvising. Okay, great.
There was a little bit of, sometimes when there's a scene when we come back from the awards ceremony and we come into the hotel and Jason just said, let's just see, let it fly, see what happens. And I was like, okay. And it was great, it was...
Okay, but you're with trepidation inside?
No, well, absolutely, because you think, this is Jason Isaacs. And then, and obviously, but he was brilliant and he was so generous and great fun to play opposite, you know, and it's just when you work with those people that you go, you really care about what you do, you love what you do, and you really care about the project you're involved with. And the same with Ciaran, just fabulous. Again, generous to a fault, you know, such a generous actor to work with. That's all you can hope with, that you work with an actor, that it becomes like a tennis match, that it's, you know, there's the tussle there, but there's a generosity and an openness and a trust. And both of them gave me that in spades. So it was fantastic.
One of the things at one point in my career, I was a TV producer at CNN and at MSNBC. And here in DC, I worked at Reuters TV. I've been a print reporter. So I understand that dynamic between, you know, the producer and the reporter and, you know, the editor. The editor is so important. And that seemed like here to Anna's career, this editor, Dimtry, was so important to her, and also what was going on there, because they were trying to be an independent voice, you know, for that instance. And the real Dimtry has left Russia. How did you and Ciaran, you know, prepare for those scenes? Because we heard sometimes he would talk to her, and then sometimes they would have arguments about what was going on, you know, in her reporting.
Yeah, but you felt they had this, because they were so close, they could. I mean, the relationship, I mean, in some ways, that's the sort of biggest love story in the centre of the film. It's not a romantic love story, but it's about two people who have so much love and respect for each other. And I think when you have that connection, you can, you know, you can fly off the handle, you can be, you know, the sort of clashing of wills, because they were both extremely strong-willed, but both had a passion to get the truth out there. And Dimtry had a passion to keep Anna safe. You know, like he says in the film, they never come for me. They come for my reporters, but they don't come for me. You know, so I think, you know, again, a lot of it is just to do with the chemistry, and you just look out when, you know, just get lucky when you work with, you know, an actor like Ciaran. But we just sort of went into it. It was in the script. We'd done our research. We felt we had a sense. And again, these films, in many ways, when you approach something like this, you know, again, we're not Russian. We're bringing our version of it, and then the version of the story that we want to tell. So you have to, there's times when you're like, you know, you can feel like you're putting a square peg in a round hole, and you have to go, no, you have to go with the characters in the script. You have to sort of take what you know, and then you meld it into something, you create something, you know, that has to be your own, that really has to be your own. But again, just trust and generosity, and it's just great to bounce off. And there's the scene when I find the mask, I think I've found where the masquerades are, and Anna says, you know, I'm going. And he said, you know, and I remember being in that room, and he'd lost his temper, because Ciaran's such a gentleman. You know, he's such a sort of.
But I heard he's tall, gentleman. A tall but gentleman.
Yeah, tall, very sort of handsome, and, you know, right, quite imposing.
Yes,
but very gentle and calm, and that sort of, you know. And when he went, I mean, it was, you know, he lost his temper, which was, you know, in the scene, and because he's acting so sublime. But things like that, you just have to be open. But I love it when you do a scene with somebody and you're shocked. You're shocked by their response. I didn't know how he was going to respond to that, and it was just beautiful. But yeah, he just really captured that dynamic, because he is her boss. And I think at times she forgot that. You know, she'd push and push and push, as all good journalists and reporters do, don't you? You know, you will push the boundaries.
Well, what did you learn about journalists and journalism that you didn't know before this film?
I think for me, I mean, I did speak to other journalists about going into places like, you know, going into a war zone. And what I found really interesting was a few people, and I don't know if this is quite true for Anna, but I'm sure somewhere, the idea of the adrenaline and the odd addiction you get to being back in there, how everything melts away and you become so in the moment. I mean, which is any actor's dream. I don't mean to be in a war zone, but we talk constantly about being in the moment, but to be solely focused, because it's life or death. But in some ways that becomes quite a heady mix, because everything else is muted. and you're just living in that moment. And I thought, wow, because I'd say, why would you go back? If you've been in that situation, you've got out alive. Why would you go back? And people said, you get so drawn to it, and the camaraderie of the other journalists and photographers and everyone you're working with, the people that you meet, the connections you make. And you think, I can see that. I can see how it becomes addictive, perversely addictive in a way, but the addiction to telling the truth, to know when you know something that has to get out to the world, and we're in interesting times now, aren't we, where everyone has a phone, Instagram, the stories now that we, you think, but I still feel the need for actual journalists to be in that situation, to be able to bring us the truth back.
Right. So, because you'll get the facts. That's why.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we all know sometimes we see things on Instagram and you have to stop and think, I've seen things, and then it's something you go, that's somewhere else. Or I saw that 5 years ago. That's not now. There's different, how we've got to be so careful because we're so hooked into social media and what it's, as we know, we're the world's slightly in a mess because we believe, the truth, what's happened to the truth. We are fighting for the truth at the moment.
I think this film is coming at a very interesting times, given the uncertainty, given the fact that, the MO of the Putin regime has been to either assassinate or poison somebody that they don't like. And then what's happening here with press freedoms in the United States, it's coming back. It's still, that was what happened to Anna was in 2006. But here we are almost 20 years later, and we're still having these issues with people who say they don't want journalists to be out there and telling their story.
No, and it's how, 2024 was the most dangerous year to be a journalist. The amount of journalists, and we look what's happening in the Middle East. We've got people like Shireen Akbar, who still, there's been no accountability, who was shot at point blank range, shot through the head with a press vest on in Palestine. It's in Syria, in Yemen, it is an extremely dangerous time to be a journalist, and that we still have people who want to do that job, who want to who feel that passion for us to do it,
right.
To get us,
have their voices heard. But that's what you're doing in this film. And I guess I'm wondering, we talked about the seriousness of the film, but maybe you can tell us you shot in Latvia. I heard it was very cold when you were shooting there, but maybe you can tell us some type of inside story or something that you guys were doing on set, how to have fun in between everything.
It was good. I mean, we had a Latvia's beauty, in Riga, it was beautiful. But it was cold and it was snowy and it was icy. I mean, I didn't realize how icy. I went out the first day in, pair of, I thought, quite sturdy boots. And I think I slipped and fell about 4 times on the way to the show.
Oh, Maxine can't film today because she slipped and fell.
It was extreme. I had to go and then I need some really heavy duty. I had a pair of, they're not the best sold, a pair of Red Wing boots on. I thought, they'll do. These are hardy American boots for outdoors. And no, I found myself, So the weather was a little bit of something to sort of contend with. But I'm from the north of England, so I'm used to cold, But it was beautiful being there. I mean, and because we're all away from home, the cast and the crew were all, Marie made sure everyone was in the same hotel, which is amazing. So, it was a real bonding experience. And people came, actors came, Ellie Bamber, we had Harry Lawtey,
Right. Harry Lawtey, yeah. I know him from Magpie Murders, but I know he's also was Harry Denton, the Joker. So he's very well known.
Yeah. I mean, and now he's just played Richard Burton in and obviously Industry. So he was, we had a fabulous Naomi Battrick. We had this amazing cast who sort of came, did a week, came, you know what I mean? So I was sort of there for the eight weeks, sort of hanging out with the crew, and then, the actors when they came. But it was, for the subject matter, I think you do when things are this heavy, you do have to keep a sense of humour and that's my way of working. I think you've got to, for me, acting is play. it's serious subject matters, but it's got to be, I don't like it when it starts to impact on people's sort of mental health. You know what I mean? So we and just to be in Riga and spend sort of 8 weeks there and get to know the place a little bit, and so it was, and it's Latvia's beautiful, and went to the theatre, and there was an amazing Latvian actress who came and played the news reporter, and then I was sort of saying to her, "Oh, do you do theatre?" And she was like, "Oh, a little bit," and then it turned out she's like the leading actress in Latvian theatre. You know what I mean? And she was in a production. I'm going crazy now. I went to see, and she was the lead, so I went down to the sort of the version of the National Theatre and went to see her. So yeah, it was great. It's always when you get to work in different places and speaking to people, because there was a lot of Russians expats in Latvia.
Yes, I think filming took place in 2022. So at that point, they're probably
So a lot of people at that point were coming. So I got to meet people. I got to meet quite a few Russians who then, who'd made the move to Latvia. So just to be able to chat to them. So it felt like there was a constant connection, even when we were filming with Russia and what was happening there.
Well, speaking of mental health, I read that you do a lot of cycling. Was that something? Why is cycling the exercise of choice? And that you did a short film. You wrote a film about somebody from Leeds. Vera.
I did a play. I wrote a radio play, then a stage play, which actually it has been, I think it's about 10 years ago now. But yeah, mainly I used to always cycle just to get about, because when I was growing up as a kid, I lived sort of semi-rural, and I was a single parent family. My mum didn't have the time to, drive me here, there and everywhere. So I just used to get on the bus or get on my bike. It was easy. And then I wrote this play about this amazing woman called Beryl Burton, who was a big cyclist in the 50s and 60s in the UK. And she used to beat men. She was extraordinary, but because she was a woman, she was outside of the cycling fraternity, had very little recognition. So I sort of felt I wanted to rectify that in some way. So I wrote firstly a radio play for BBC Radio 4, and then Leeds Playhouse got in touch and said, "Would you adapt it for stage?" And I said, "Oh, okay." I'd never written a stage play before. I mean, I've written a few since then, which was a great sort of jumping off point. So I just thought, again, I better, I'm writing a play about this cyclist, and the play was 4 actors who, for quite a bit of it, were on stationary bikes, who were saying to me, "Do you realise how hard this is?" And I was like, "Is it? I just thought you'd be," and they were like, "This is," So then I thought I better step up. So I joined, I got invested in myself in a nice, road bike, and joined a cycling club.
Wow, that's great.
And then never looked back. And it's brilliant. It's just great. I love it as exercise, because you feel, I always feel like I'm a kid again. You go out in the countryside for 3-4 hours at a time, great company. It's great exercise. It's great for the mind. It clears the mind. Again, it's that, everything sort of melts away. It's you, the bike, the road. We're trying to dodge, there's quite a few angry drivers out there who for some reason don't like cyclists, really don't like cyclists. But, there's a lot of very polite drivers as well. But yeah, it was just great fun and great exercise. So that was the reason. And I'm in the process now of adapting Beryl. She was called Beryl Burton, the film's called Beryl. I'm now in the process of trying to adapt it for screen. Somebody's now got in touch, and so
wonderful.
So yeah, we'll see.
I saw that caught my eye because it said Leeds. So my grandparents, when they were alive, they lived in Leeds. So So they would come here to the United States. My grandmother was half American, half British. So my dad decided, after growing up in England, he came here. So that's how we got to the States. And my grandfather was half Irish and half English. So we would go to Leeds, though, and I remember going there and, going to visit them and going around all the different places, going anywhere from York to Skipton. I remember one time my grandfather taking me to Bolton Abbey, and I was like 17 at the time. And I was like, I just want to go to the dance clubs. I want to go, I am not interested in going here, but that whole, Northern Yorkshire and being up on the moors and the roads and.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
It
but
is.
I'm with you. At 17, I wouldn't have been wanting to hang around Bolton Abbey. I would have been wanting to be down a nightclub. But I mean,
right.
What a gorgeous part of the world, and Leeds, and going, the moors, and then going up to North Yorkshire and like say Skipton. Yeah. Oh, it's such and Beryl. I mean, and it's hard, that landscape.
Right. And so that's why I vision this person writing, and when you were talking about it, those roads
she used to do what she. Yeah, I mean, in the hills. I mean, somebody was saying recently I think they were going to making a film about an Italian cyclist, and they were using around Yorkshire because it is. Great. I mean, and the hills. I did it's called the Prestige Rafa. The cycling club is a Rafa Prestige, and you do 100 miles, and we did it in North Yorkshire, and I nearly died. It took me 8 hours. Beryl Burton used to do 100 miles in 4 hours. It took me twice that time.
Yeah.
To do 8 hours. And the hills, I mean, you do one, and I was literally expletives at the bottom of the next one going, I'm never going to make it up there. There's a lot of getting off and walking and getting back on again. But it's beautiful, but it's tough terrain. And she would just slice through those hills like butter, extraordinary athlete, extraordinary woman. But yeah, I mean, but I think for her as well, having that on your doorstep and being able to get out into the wild, into nature, into that landscape is, I think it must have really done something for her, more than physical, I think.
Right. I also read, I know this is, I am going to get back to the film, but I did read that you were in the Great British Bake Off, and it just aired in March. Here in the United States, we are super big fans of the Great British Bake Off. We have not seen that episode. What did you bake, and that you had to go cycling afterwards to get off all those calories?
Well, there was a little bit of, I kept, I'm not a baker, absolutely not a baker. And if it ever comes to the US, you'll see I'm not a baker. But because it was for Stand Up to Cancer, and my agent would say, and I said, I can't. And he said, come on, it's a really good cause. And I thought, of course. And I'd lost my mum to cancer many years ago. And I just thought, touches so many people. I mean, I would imagine there's not many people who haven't been affected, either lost somebody or somebody's been very poorly with it. So I decided, I made, we have the showstopper, and it had to be made out of sort of biscuit. And it was your romantic episode in your life. So my now husband, when we first started dating, took me to Dungeness, where Derek Jarman had his house, the amazing artist, Derek Jarman. So I made a ginger, and he lived in Prospect Cottage, which is this beautiful sort of, what can I say? It's a wooden house. It's black with yellow. It's black timber with yellow frames in your yellow door, and it's got the garden it's sort of shells and pebbles, and it's beautiful. So I made a very crude impression of Prospect Cottage. I did some flapjacks, which I was told they were a disaster, which I was quite proud about. I think if you're going for it, go strong.
That's right. You got it. You got to go for it. All right. That's great. No, thank you for sharing that little story. But I know this is we've been chatting and laughing, but this is a very serious film. It's a serious topic. Yeah. The premiere is coming up. What do you hope people come away from the film thinking or seeing, or maybe even a call to action here?
Absolutely, that we have to fight tooth and nail for our right for free press. We have to fight tooth, because this may be Russia. You know what I mean? But we are in very dark times. I feel we're in very dark times around the world. You know what I mean? The rise of the right. It's we're saying the rise, it's here. We're on the verge, world war, you know what I mean? We're teetering. It's a very precarious time. And I don't want to, you don't want to frighten people or depress people. But I think we're not going to make a change unless we stand up. We've got to fight and there's been amazing demonstrations in the US, hasn't there? I mean, I've been seeing the pictures of people getting out on the streets, but we've got to fight for democracy. We've got to fight for the freedom of press. We've got to fight for the truth, the Freedom of Information Act. We've really just, we've got, there's a list as long as your arm at the moment. But if we don't, I'm really concerned that how do we come back from this? And what does the future hold? And if it's not for us, it's for the future generations. It's dark at the moment. It's dark and the future doesn't look bright, but there's always possibility of change. But we have to come together and we have to be brave. And we have to look at people like Anna and go, she was brave. She put a neck on the line. She put more than a neck on the line, and I think we can take a little bit of that. It's not about putting yourself in a situation where maybe you're going to get harmed, but maybe, I just think sometimes just pushing. We can't be comfortable. We can't stay comfortable. We're not going to stay comfortable whether we get proactive or not. So we might as well, get involved and try and make some change and get our voices out there and heard and have a real think about the news that we're being fed. Question. We've got to question more, like Anna did. Question why. Why is this being said? What is the root of this? Where does this come from? So, yeah.
Well, the film is Words of War, thanks to Maxine Peake. Her portrayal of Anna's story and the story of other journalists will not be forgotten, thanks to you. So congratulations on this role. And thank you for joining Media Maker Spotlight. Thank you, Maxine.
Thank you, Sandra. It's been lovely to chat to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to Media Maker Spotlight from Women in Film and Video. To learn more about WIF, visit F as in Frank, V as in Victor.org. This podcast is created by Sandra Abrams, Candace Block, Brandon Ferry, Tara Jabari, and Jerry Reinhardt, and edited by Michelle Kim and Inez Perez, with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio. Subscribe to continue learning from more amazing media makers. Please visit MediaMakersSpotlight.com for more information.